Hey guys, this is Mike Shaw. I'm the co-host of The First, The Last, The Nerdom. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties and glitches, so we lost about the first 5 minutes or so of our current episode, episode 5, Dune the novel. I just wanted to put a little front into this to let you know that as the recording picked up, we did get to the rest of the show. I just wanted to preface this and say that every week I am very much new to this. Thomas is as well. However, a lot of this falls on my shoulders, and I am learning as I go. I have very basic skill set when it comes to OBS, as well as trying to use third-party software. For a long time there, we use Zoom. I'm currently using Zoom to record this. In any case, if you have any suggestions for what I should use, an all-in-one solution, I would be all ears. I've heard StreamYard. I am researching that. By next week, our 6th week, we will be back in full effect, and we will make sure that we take care of any audio or video or any of that kind of streaming issues. We are trying to get our YouTube channel off the ground. However, it takes some time to unlock the ability to live stream. Maybe you are aware of that, maybe not. We also have a new Facebook page up. We are in the process of reworking our website so that we can get off a hosted solution from a provider, and we can have it all under our one roof to where we are censor proof, et cetera, et cetera. But mainly we want everyone to know that this is a labor of love from myself and Thomas, and we are not going to stop, and we will hopefully be bringing you better content as time goes on. I'm sure you've seen us evolve as time has gone on. But at the end of the day, I just wanted to kind of record this and put it on the front end of the podcast or the episode and let you know that we are aware of those things. Please direct any comments toward my way. I'm learning as I go. This is a labor of love that is a decade, if not more, in the making. Thomas and I have both always wanted to do something like this. Now it's current day, and no better time than the present. So I just wanted to kind of preface this and front end it. I believe that we started talking about Dune the novel. My apologies to Thomas and everybody out there. We are aware of it, and we are getting better as we go forward. Know that I am the type in technology, and Thomas is the type as well, to always be improving, especially in what we don't know. That's never an excuse in our current jobs. Nobody pays us to say, I don't know. Well, they do pay us at that point. Maybe we don't know at the front end, but by the end of it, we do know effectively enough to fix the problem. So this is, again, a wonderful episode that we had. Next week, I believe that we will be covering a snapshot, maybe some Chris Nolan action, something like that. But in the meantime, please enjoy the rest of the vast majority of the podcast was salvaged. It was recorded. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to comment, likes, and subscribe. We are open to feedback. Maybe you like us, maybe you don't. That's okay. We're a young channel. We will get off the ground, and we will hopefully be at 5,000, 50,000 feet in our ornithopter. See you soon.
He actually went into the psychiatric hospital right after production had quit, and he came out of the psychiatric hospital, wrote 13 scripts, and one of them was Alien.
Oh,
so Alien was born out of the failed Dune movie. So it seems like just masterpieces come out of just being associated with Dune.
For sure. Yeah, I really enjoyed. I just enjoyed it. It was a great romp through the thing, and of course, where the book ends, and we won't give spoilers the first half, where the scenes that were selected, and as you see, Paul Atreides develop from this mild, kind of unsteady potential leader, not sure if he wants to take the mantle or not, whatever's going. And then you had that wonderful scene in the movie where they're in the graveyard, and they're kind of talking back and forth about the duty of responsibility, and he basically says, don't worry about it, you're my son, you're always going to be my son, that kind of thing. And I think that the book, the mother, Lady Jessica, the concubine of what is his name, Leto?
The Duke, Leto, yeah.
Her role was a lot more kind of lower on the tier of things. As the story progressed versus on the book where she was kind of put up here, and that was kind of
Oh yeah.
very quickly glossed over.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He in the movie kind of balanced out the power between the husband and the wife. She seemed a bit more meek in the movie, although you did get a sense of strength to her. But yeah, in the book, she's a bit of a badass in the book.
Yeah, it's a lot. The world building, you kind of understand. You definitely understand all the parts and all the players and the organizations. And I'm gonna slaughter this, but the help me out. What's the Bene Gesserit?
Benny just
Yeah, thank you. That, and then the world building is just substantial. It actually, I also picked up a couple books too. I picked up the prequels, one of the Frank Herbert prequels, because there's a curious line here. So there's the original author Frank Herbert and all of the books that he actually put out and published, and then he had notes left over. And I don't want to get into it. And then his son took over with another writer, and they they continued on down the line. I won't get into that because I have no frame of reference whether it's good or bad. But there was the Butlerian Jihad. That was one of the prequel books, and I picked that one up, and I also immediately picked up Dune Messiah.
Yeah. I haven't picked it up yet, but I'm definitely gonna start reading that here shortly.
Sure. Yeah.
But the one thing I noticed, one of the things in the movie I noticed that kind of caught my eye, but I was like, why is that there? Was the bull head and the painting, and they touch on it, and those are actually from Duke Leto's father. The bull, they have the bull because that was the bull that killed his father,
right?
The horns, and then the painting is of his father. And
right.
I thought it was very interesting that they put that in the movie, but didn't even reference it or anything. It's there to catch your eye. If you've read the book,
yeah,
that's, I guess, what the kids would call an Easter egg.
Yeah, there's like a million love letters that Danae put in the movie that paid homage to the book. I don't have any hardcore feelings about one or the other. I mean, as far as like truth to whatever, it's a different concept. It's been tried before, and I think we're obviously what we both liked doing the movie, and I think it probably hitting the top of the marks for making a book into a movie. And I'm really excited to see what he does with part 2, because you're left with a cliffhanger where the book, when it cleans up, it leaves you in a completely different space. So it'll be interesting to see how he bridges books 1 and 2. And I think it's Dune, the novel, and then it's Dune Messiah, and then I can't remember the third one, but essentially it leaves you...
Children of Dune.
Yeah, thank you. Children of Dune. It kind of gives you a whole wider story arc than not of it. It was just the pacing was good. I was entertained. I never kind of got bored. It has all the hallmarks of a good book that I look for in a sci-fi world, which is the world building, the characters, like the whole thing. Obviously in personal taste, but it was really good.
Yeah, and I like that. Even though it's a science fiction book, a lot of the technology takes a backseat to Paul and his story. It's very much along the lines of the hero's journey type story, and it almost plays more as a fantasy novel than a science fiction, which I wasn't expecting to get that. But then one of the things that Frank Herbert said is that he built in layers to the book so that you could lock in on one layer to the story, and then once you finish it, you could go back in looking at a different layer and get a whole different vibe from it. So, which I can see. One of the things that was interesting to me is his characters. Every character's very unique. When you have a big cast of characters like that, you run the risk of letting them all kind of blend together. And I don't know how your imagination goes when you're reading a book. I don't really populate it with a whole lot of details, so unless the author gives it to me. So
Mhm.
if you're not going to color the character very well, they may get lost with some of the other characters. But he does a very good job of one character later in the book. He has like a speech impediment or a pronounced speech pattern that was very interesting, and that really kind of enlivened that particular character. I think his name was Finrin Ring or something.
Uh,
He
uh,
was the
Fenrir?
but yeah, the emperor's assassin, so to
Yeah,
speak.
yeah. You really, it's visually. Devi had to tell a certain kind of storyline with Paul, and
Mhm.
whereas in the book you kind of get to sit in his mind's eye, so to speak, and you really understand
Mhm.
where and what he's doing and why. And I really appreciated
Mhm.
that. Whereas where the movie leaves off is kind of where he transforms over from
Mhm.
being, this unsure of himself kind of leader to de facto, leader, and not only that, but adoptee of the Freeman, for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, and I like one of the interesting things is the book itself. He had a hard time getting it published to start with. I think most of the major publishers turned him down. The only publisher that he could find published the book was actually known for they mostly publish auto repair manuals, and one of the guys at the publisher was like, no, we need to publish this book, and they ended up publishing it, but it ended up costing like $6, and which is today would have been like $50. So it didn't sell sell very well to start with. I think the guy that got him to publish it ended up getting fired. But yeah, it had a bit of a auspicious beginnings.
Yeah, and
But
fun fact with that, the very first publisher that he couldn't get it done. So, lo and behold, he found an unusual publisher, which was Chilton. Which if
uh,
you're a car head, you know that they make all kinds of auto repair manuals and whatnot
mhm.
through the decades. And I apologize, I am getting really bad connect and disconnect for the thing. So whatever. Fortunately, I'm recording, so regardless. But in any case, hopefully I can kill this notification here. Bear with me here. I'm not familiar with. Bear with me. Uno momento.
Por favor.
Yeah, I gotta kill this manage. Jeez, Windows.
It could be the robots coming back and
Yeah, no
causing the
kidding.
rebellion.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a little fun fact. Chilton publisher. They published it initially, and I think I have that up here. Dune book. Chilton publisher was it's on the Wikipedia page here, so I'll just pull it up here. So while we're chit chatting, Chilton Books. That's right, Chilton Books. That's just a fun little thing, and I believe we kind of going back to what you were saying before. There is no technology in this. I mean, there is, but there
Mhm.
isn't. It's not every other science fiction book I've read, technology has a play in it somewhere, some way,
Mhm.
somehow. And
Mhm.
that really takes a backseat, and that's why the movie was it blew me away because there was
Mhm.
none of that, and you didn't need it. It's just such a completely different take on what we're used to for science fiction. Like it's just taken for
Mhm.
granted, like say a Star Wars or a Star Trek or Stargate. The
Mhm.
technology kind of is centerpiece or plays a part in that. Star Wars, you had the Death Star. A Star Trek, obviously, you had iterations throughout TOS to TNG
Mhm.
to Voyager to Deep Space Nine,
Right.
and I won't mention the other ones, but that's neither one because I haven't really watched the newer this decade versions of them or Stargate, like where it's like they find ancient technology and then it's humans always trying to
Mhm.
scramble for for getting
Mhm.
that so that they don't have they can always be the scrappy underdog. But none of that
Mhm.
has anything to do with it, and it really is.
Mhm.
I don't want to say a Game of Thrones of the stars, but in a way
Mhm.
I could see where I could see where somebody would make that analogy. I personally probably wouldn't, but I can understand it
Yeah.
because there is palace intrigues, and as you go throughout the book, he doesn't shy away from that at all. I mean, there are complicated
Yeah.
plots within plots within plots,
Right.
and they
Mhm.
only expand. They don't ever contract as you go
Mhm.
forward. And it's kind of
Mhm.
like I've seen. It's not really it's caricatured as like not really a savior type movie,
Mhm.
but more along the lines of like a cautionary tale of what happens when you follow a charismatic leader, something like that. And I think that's kind of fair and kind of not,
Mhm.
because
Right.
the Gesserit were the ones that had laid down all these ancient prophecies and all this stuff,
Mhm.
and not just Arrakis or Dune, the world of Dune,
Mhm.
but other things. And they kind of sort of very quickly
Yeah.
touch on that in the
Yeah.
movie.
Right. And I guess those criticisms could be made for a simpler story, but this story is very much layered with, like you said, all these different intrigues and different ideas. And like Paul himself, he doesn't have a clear path. Many times he could see, with the help of Spice and his training, he can see the future. But I love his various description of him seeing the future. If I remember, I highlighted it in my book, where it was likened to seeing the folds of a handkerchief, that it's not a clear vision of the future, but you could see kind of lapse of it. And
Yes.
that was very interesting. And he keeps seeing this ugly jihad in his
Hmm.
future, and he's wanting to avoid that. And it's interesting because it seems like everything is pulling him towards that, and he's resisting that. And so it's very interesting to see his internal struggle against that, and at times opposing his mother's vision. And it was interesting, not to get too spoilery, but his challenges with his mother, who had been shaping him all this
Hmm.
time. His change from, I guess, the pupil to being his own person.
Yeah, and the way that there's a lot of prescient. I can't think of the I
Prescience, yeah.
yeah, that whatever. Sorry, I was gonna look it up anyway. That prescience, that foresight is what it is. Like where
Hmm.
he doesn't see it as a straight this or that. It's more like I just started reading Dune Messiah, and what I'm calling to mind right now is like they kind of redescribe it a little bit of like when he's kind of in the moment and whatever, and it's like an undulating fabric that he kind of sees. It's meaning that
Okay, yeah. Hmm.
it's always changing,
Yeah.
and it's
Hmm.
always kind of changing. And even though he has foresight, he doesn't have complete foresight because he's blinded to certain things
Hmm.
as you get into it. And I wouldn't even be able to spoil it to call up the details, but you kind of understand that despite the fact that he is him and he has these powers, he still has limits on him. Now, definitely, I think the battle scenes in the Sardaukar, all those are wonderful. You know, just how things happen. You kind of see like it's they take them under and they just how to put it's initially built. You know very little about the Freeman when you enter into the thing. It's almost like the movie a little bit, and then you realize
Hmm.
as they let you understand of like the Freemen aren't just like 10,000 or even 50,000 on the planet. You know, like the Conan believes that they're to be. It's a whole planet full of hardcore people that are ready to fight and take it to
Hmm.
back to the enemy. And that whole scene, that whole thing is wonderfully built.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And another thing is when while I was thinking, while I was reading the book, there's certain books and films that come fully realized. Like, a lot of science fiction movies or books get in the habit of building on upon what was there before it. Like, once Blade Runner came out, everything looked like Blade Runner, whereas Dune is its and like Blade Runner itself, they are visions unto themselves. There's nothing that came before it that would be comparable to it. So it's in same way thing with like the Lord of the Rings. There then where it's all the fantasy stuff after that kind of apes, or kind of uses that as a map to it. So it's kind of interesting how a person can come up with a complete world, and a world like that.
Yeah, and I believe I watched an interview, a Frank Herbert interview
Hmm.
before he died, sometime in the 80s, whenever he died, whatever it was, maybe
Hmm.
whatever time. I'm not even going to look it up,
Hmm.
but he was talking about how, as a person who had jumped around between jobs, it kind of built his experience up to the
Hmm.
point to where he could offer up a different view on this or that. He was very well versed in life in general,
Hmm.
and I think that comes through loud and clear the way he writes,
Hmm.
for sure. And
Hmm.
I want to say I read a thing about how he was in Oregon and he was doing some kind of a reporter's job
Yeah,
or
the
something like
Oregon
that.
Dunes. Yep.
And
About
he
the
kind of
irrigation or whatever. Hmm.
right. And I think the thing of that was that it was about the dunes would move and they would swallow up this or that or whatever. And there was kind of a thing there. I don't want to speak to that because I didn't come prepared with that. I think I should have. But in any case, it's still built into all those little
Hmm.
things that throughout his life that he did, whether he was
Hmm.
a reporter or I think he worked for a speechwriter for some politician at some point, yada yada yada, or some campaign at some point. But you
Hmm.
can really see how all those bits and pieces kind of add up to the sum total that is Dune.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
great book,
Yeah.
great book.
And I read where he also did magic mushrooms,
Okay.
so and that kind of informed the spice and the the sandworms. So yeah, and that kind of, and he's very steeped in Buddhism and Jungian psychology, which I fell in love with Jungian psychology in college. Yeah, that's kind of gets into the kind of the headspace of pre-existing, and the prescient thoughts and things like that, and
Absolutely.
the whole idea of gender, where all the Bene Gesserits are women, but
Hmm.
there's one man that can bridge the gap,
Hmm.
become above all of that. But that's all kind of tied in with the Jungian philosophy.
Yeah. And
And mhm.
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I think I was done.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of call that out too. The Bene Gesserit also they have the ability for females to, and they're steeped in their arts or whatever, their magics or whatever, but they have the ability to control whether they conceive or not, and even to where
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I think they can even pick the sex of the baby too. I think
Hmm.
in the Dune
Yeah,
world
yeah.
anyway. But the
Hmm.
only other one that I've seen like that was written decades later with Ian M. Banks and the Culture series, and in that humanity basically has evolved to the point to where females can do that as well, to where they
Hmm.
can alter their biologics as they need to.
Hmm.
There's a little bit more technology and
Hmm.
influence in that as well, but that's the only other world building that I'm aware of in a science fiction novel, like where that's a concept that
Hmm.
is, kind of, it might become a thing in the future. We never know. Who knows? But it's also his books are very biologically based as far as, again, there's no computers. There is no
Hmm.
deus ex machina. There is no one
Hmm.
machine that will solve all the problems or is a plot device. None of that. It's
Hmm.
more about, and in that, when you kind of take that away, and you can understand why they went to a more religious viewpoint and society than they didn't, because at that
Hmm.
point, what do you have to hold you up than technology, which is an interesting thing. I'm not going to get into sociology
Hmm.
of it. I'm not even going to
Hmm.
pretend to have an opinion of that high or low or whatever, but it's just interesting
Right.
the concepts that are explored. It's no wonder
Hmm.
why Frank Herbert would be. I don't know. They say the big three are Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, and Heinlein, among others. But it's no doubt that Herbert has a place in the pantheon of the Godfathers, or the
Hmm.
Mount Rushmore of science fiction books in the 20th century, for sure.
Yeah,
In
definitely.
my opinion, anyway.
Right. And as I'm more of a horror guy, I lean towards you for the sci-fi, because or science fiction, because I haven't nearly read enough. I've did my fair share of reading various Star Trek novels and Star Wars novels
Sure,
back
sure.
as a child, but yeah, I haven't done a very much heavy reading in that. Although I have read not extensively, but a lot of Harlan Ellison, which he kind of goes over the whole spectrum of things, but he leans into the sci-fi as well.
Oh man, there's so much there, and to kind of step into your world a little bit, I watched a YouTube video on, I don't know, 20 top movies to watch on HBO Max or whatever, science fiction ones, and a lot of them were like Scanner Darkly, Eraserhead, that kind of thing. So it's funny because as we kind of, as our interests overlap and we're kind of learning about this and learning about that, I saw a lot of those things that were more not just science fiction, but had some aspect of horror to it. And it's fascinating because we definitely have overlap in that area, especially the all-time
Yeah.
most popular classic that the average common person would understand to be equally science fiction and equally horror, Aliens, or I mean Alien.
Yeah.
And
Not to go ahead.
no, go ahead. That's all I had to say.
Not to get too far away from Frank Herbert, but with horror, there's a writer, Dennis Etchinson, I believe it is. He posited the thought that whereas science fiction and fantasy are clear-cut genres, in that there's elements that you have to have for a science fiction novel or a fantasy novel, whereas a horror is an emotion. It's not truly a genre per se, in that horror can be spread upon just about everything, and you really can't have, as far as a horror novel, you really can't sustain horror for the entire novel, whereas a science fiction novel, you can be a science fiction novel from beginning to end. You're in a horror novel, you're going to have your quiet periods where there's no horror.
Right.
So his thought is that horror is kind of all encompassing, and that you could have it in anything, and that's why it can marriage quite easily with a science fiction novel or movie, or even a comedy. Shaun of the Dead can be horror plus comedy.
Right.
So it's kind of a unique genre in that it can dabble into just about everything.
Yeah, and maybe that's a show for another day to cover Alien, and it really drill down on the concept of like where there's really true overlap between science fiction and horror. There's a lot out there for that to cover that. Probably like I said, the most popular one that I'm aware of is Alien. That that people, either you talk to them and you say, oh, that scary movie, or you say, oh yeah, that's the one that has the science fiction. If you're depending upon what intersection, what side of the intersection you're on in that on that movie. But yeah, kind of pulling it back to Dune, there were definitely a lot more. It was a lot more brutal and ruthless as far as the character build up. You really, really hate. You read to hate certain kind of characters like the Baron, and you just see how underhanded and nasty and sleazy. And then you see though that the interconnections between the characters, you kind of see that this is like this really models how it used to be in medieval times or whatever, like with royalty and the I don't want to give too much away, but people are related that you wouldn't think. And again, kind of where the movie teases where the first book ends, it kind of teases where Lady Jessica plays a role, and there's a sibling that I'm talking about, but and then when that sibling is introduced into the world, you see that they are not humans are not aware of. It would be interesting to make the argument about whether it's horror or scary, or I don't know. I'm not competent enough to say that or not, but you kind of understand that there's a whole other world that humanity is a part of, where the metaphysical, or whatever you want to call it, is a known factor in this. Whereas, like, say, in a Foundation type series, they have psychohistory, and that's kind of like the mathematics of understanding how broad arcs of history work, and in Heinlein's, there's a lot of that too, that theme throughout his book. I even think he believes, well, he even calls it the same thing, psychohistory, but it's not quite, or I think in Heinlein it's more about morality has a mathematics to it, whereas in Dune, they're very comfortable with that concept of the metaphysical world and understanding that humanity isn't just our flesh and blood, but there's something else there, a soul or whatever you want to call it, a ghost, that kind of thing. That's a big part of the world, and they're not only are they aware of it, but they they cover it, and you're kind of broken into. I don't want to give too much away, but it's a ride for sure, from the time that the page 1 to page whatever. It's a very big long book. It's an epic.
Right. Yeah, when I told my sister, my younger sister, I was reading it, she goes, "That's a big book, isn't it?" I was like, "Yes, it is." But
Yes, it is.
yeah, one of the things I actually was surprised on, I even though you hate him, I love the Baron, and I like the fact that certain books, like say Game of Thrones, after they break up the chapter and you go from one character situation to another, there's most of the time you're going to find yourself personally where you like a certain character more, and you're like, oh gosh, are we going back to this character story? I really would rather be back with this character. Whereas with Dune, I loved everything. When we jumped, oh great, we're back to the Baron, and when you got done with him, you went back to Paul. It's like, oh hey Paul, and you're ready for Paul again. Yeah, and I liked that there's certain chapters you could probably have cut out of Dune, because you're introduced to certain characters that don't really have that end up not having a major role in the book, but you really enjoy just reading those, like the dinner scene towards the beginning of the book that wasn't in the movie. You're introduced to a whole cast of characters that have really no meaning to the rest of the book, but really enriches that world. So I'm glad it's there, but I guess another publisher may have said, get rid of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about. Are you talking about the? I think the '84 version of the movie covered it, and I only know this from reading about bits and pieces. Like, where is the? Or is that what you're talking about?
Oh well, actually, I get for the '84, but it's not in that movie either.
Okay, never mind. That's a different scene that I've heard. Never mind. Disregard.
No, I think it is the scene you're thinking about. There's a scene in the book where they had just arrived on the planet, and right after the crawler scene where the crawler gets swallowed by the sandworm, they come back and they have a big that's the banquet. Yeah, there you go.
That's what it is.
That's the scene. That's the chapter I'm talking about in the book. And whereas you're introduced to like the water merchant and all these other various characters that you never see again.
Right.
But it was quite interesting reading all of that. It gives you a real sense of the world, and I guess it's a part of the world building as well. And there's a pivotal scene where Leto leaves the dinner party, and Paul is put at the head of the table as to replace the Duke, and you get to see, really start to see Paul shine as a leader in that moment. And so that kind of shows you what kind of a preview of what's going to come later on in the book when he becomes a man.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, you really get locked in the seat with Paul, and you kind of see as he develops and as he goes on, he is a torn, flawed human character, and he goes back and forth all the time about this or that. Am I doing the right thing or whatever? Then it kind of sort of sets it's foreshadowing toward later on books. I'm familiar with the overall story arc of the first 3 books. Generally speaking, I just don't have all the details, and I haven't experienced the books other than the first one, but you definitely are riding in that seat with him, and you really see how torn he is as his character develops and as the dynamics develop, even all the way out to, again, the end of the first book is much more satisfying because you're put in a place to where what scenes are, it really sets you up for the second book, whereas the movie kind of dumps you off at like where Paul is just kind of sort of coming of age, or like there's a change in him, especially with his fight with Jameis. And throughout the book, you really understand how, and the gravity of Paul's first kill, so to speak. I don't think that's giving anything away, but they show that, but they don't show what that means in the Freeman culture. They don't go into how important that is, and how they call him water fat. They call him, like water is the base level thing in this arid world of Arrakis. And it's not like trying to put words to it, but in any case, there's like I guess the best way to put it would be, if you're familiar with the Chronicles of Riddick, the movie, that those are based on any books or anything. I don't think they are, but if they are, shame on me. But in the Chronicles of Riddick, if you watch those movies, there is basically you keep what you kill. That mentality. It's kind of like that a little bit in the Freeman culture, but it's not. But in
all about the water.
Right. It is, and the still suit is very important. And then there's a level of detail too that answers a lot of questions too in the books that the ornithopters are a thing, and that scene where they're in the sandstorm, whatever, I believe that is for the most part in the book as well.
Yeah.
Rather the other way around. The movie shows that is like one of the important scenes of like Lady Jessica and Paul and getting the heck out of Dodge and going there. And there are a lot more. I would be curious to read something along the lines of cloning and genetics, and how it was written in 1965, and how he kind of talks about that. Again, these are kind of concepts and things that are kind of forward thinking and forward looking, but it's no doubt why it's just a wonderful walk through a different take on science fiction that I am not used to, at least in the books that I've read, and I am no expert by any means, just a casual fan. Casual to hardcore fan, depending upon what author you bring to the table.
Right. Right.
So with that, we are about 40-ish minutes in, and unfortunately our live stream cut off, so that is what it is. But fortunately, we're recording, so this will be all after the fact. I think we lost the intro, and we might try to fix that a little bit here. But I think we lost about 4 minutes, but. This is a work in progress, and I am learning as we go. I am OJT, but that's okay. That's okay.
Right. Yeah, we're having fun here. But yeah, it's like how it's compared to being the science fiction Lord of the Rings, but whereas Lord of the Rings is really based in history and the characters and them having a singular vision on a mission, whereas Dune is very much kind of a headspace kind of book dealing with free-floating goals as far as where the future is going to go. There's not like a clear quest, and I like that. I like both, but there's a interesting dynamic where they're kind of opposites. And I was reading where J.R.R. Tolkien refused to review Dune because he intensely hated it, and he didn't think that he would do a fair job of reviewing it because of that. Which I could see that, because he's kind of this staunch British guy, very, very Christian. And I don't think the whole magic mushrooms getting,
getting in that headspace would be something that he could wrap his head around.
I would agree.
But that's just my conjecturing.
No, I would agree with that. They say there's criticism on Heinlein as he got older. His last 10 books or so, I don't know, last 5 or 10 books were really out there as far as freedoms. And this is a PG-13, so I'm not going to say the word, but there are certain adult, I'll put it that way, adult freedoms that come through in his book that are very ugly to some people. And that's a fair criticism. It is what it is. But this way to put it would be a lecherous old man. A lecherous old man would think and write, which is maybe it's on point, but you're not going to get the value and the bang for the buck if you start at later Heinlein versus early Heinlein. Early Heinlein is vastly different. Matter of fact, a lot of his novels were juvenile novels, but that's neither here nor there. But it's just interesting, and I could see that where if you have somebody like Frank Herbert, who I understand, not a lecherous old man, but he was free with his opinion on certain things and how things were going. And there's criticisms there. We're not going to get into the social, cultural aspects of it. That's not what we're here to do. We're just here to just enjoy what it is, which is just entertainment, science fiction, in it. I can definitely see, though, kind of going back to him as, like, say, a forefather of science fiction. You can very clearly see where Star Wars borrowed from here, where other aspects borrowed from there, that kind of thing. Like where it's just, I don't think it's a us versus them kind of thing. I just think it's a really cool callback to, hey, you had George Lucas, and he was a visionary in his own right, obviously, and where he took different concepts of this and that and borrowed here and there. And it influenced pretty much every science fiction author from 65 on. Like I could see like where there are echoes. Now that I like Ian M. Banks, I think he's more one of the more modern ones. I think he died a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But anyway, I can see where I haven't really looked this up or researched it. Excuse me, but I can see very clearly like where I can draw that line myself. Like from this to that maybe. But that's another interesting topic that we should cover at some point. But yeah, kind of pulling it back to center. We're about 45 minutes or so, and I think it is a lot to add. And we can keep going. But having said that, I think we're kind of nearing the end of what I can supply as far as content related to this at the 42-ish minute mark. But and I don't want to pound a dead horse, but essentially. Obviously, if you haven't got it by now, I loved it, and it's a good book, and it's you won't be disappointed. I don't think.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very accessible book, whereas a lot of the hard sci-fi stuff can be hard to get into if you're not in that mindset. But it's very much a adventure book, whereas you're following the Paul, and it does get into political intrigue, but it's mainly focused on Paul for the most part, and it's more of a personal story. But yeah, I definitely recommend it. It's very unique, and I haven't read anything quite like it before.
Same.
And it took me forever to read it. And the previous thing I mentioned that my older cousin recommended to me back when I was a teenager, and like you said, your father introduced you a lot of science fiction. He was sort of kind of introduced me to a bunch of science fiction stuff, and I really looked up to him. And he got sick. He lived mostly in California, but he came back because he was sick. And one of the last books he read, and he recommended it to me, was Dune.
Oh wow!
And
that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of kept myself away from reading it. I guess I felt like I might be letting him go by reading it, but reading it really made me back to him. And yeah, it's very special.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I share that wholeheartedly with my dad. I had that special link with my dad growing up, and even my uncle. My uncle introduced me, I believe, to a lot of the Star Wars books. But I had no clue about, particularly what I'm talking about is the original Timothy Zahn novel. and kind of that the expanded universe that Disney just threw in the trash when they basically came out and said, this is canon, this is not canon, and that killed me. That killed me when that happened. Because I have very fond memories of having conversation after conversation with my uncle about this and that. Same with my dad. It's just that and that's what I love about doing the movie. That's a great segue, a natural segue, because there is that. That's what I love about Dune is it's not just the father side or the mother side or whatever. They're both there. And Paul is there full force for that concubine and all that stuff notwithstanding. I love that. I love that it's a balance because a lot of times it seems like it's one or the other. And I joke about this a lot about the whole Disney cinematic Disney or animated Disney, like where you have one whole, like one of the parents dies or whatever, yada 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 yada, whatever. But you don't really have that in Dune. I mean, per se. I mean, his dad dies.
There
or
is
whatever,
that.
but,
Yeah, there's definitely that family unit, whereas modern cinema, it's usually the dad that's gone or dead or not very present, and there's a lot of missing father kind of things with the movies lately. But with this book, there's that strong family unit that even though both the father and mother have different goals for their son, they are still a united front. And even though in the book it's kind of even further where there was kind of doubt as to whether or not his mother was betraying the father, but it was made clear in the book that the father knew that his wife was not, or his concubine wasn't betraying him.
Right, exactly. No, and that's one of the things that I love. Again, these are concepts that are decades old that some way, somehow, we got the gift of Dune in 2021. And, man, I can't speak enough on how much it's like, you have all these different sci-fi things going. You have the never-ending money machine that is Star Wars or whatever. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy it. I clearly enjoy other sci-fi, but it's so fresh and so original and such a breath of fresh air, especially to just a hardcore sci-fi fan to a casual science fiction fan. It's really, really awesome, and I love that I can take my kiddos to it, and I hope that I always say you never know what your kiddos are going to remember. You just never know.
Right, what's going to make an impact on them?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And it's just refreshing to share that. And that's really, when you boil it all down, that's what it's about. It's about connecting. If you can connect with another person or family or whatever, that's just, like I said, I think we've talked about, I think this is a reoccurring theme throughout all this stuff that we've talked about. From the time we picked up our first comic book or movie or whatever book to now, it's been a lifelong love affair to fiction, science fiction particularly, and comic books, etc. It's not just
right.
And we're just barely scratching the surface. Like, we're probably like the 8th generation. I mean, what did Superman start? Like back in the 20s or 30s or whatever?
Yeah, 30s.
And,
I think.
Yeah, I mean, it goes all the way to Batman too, and I think Marvel wasn't too far after that. But in any case, that's what I love about that.
They rolled in about the 60s.
Yeah. But and I love that comics or science fiction are a representation of the era that they were written in sometimes. And sometimes when they're reinterpreted, they are also a reflection of that era. And that keeps them always evergreen. And I think any good comic book fan knows that things are reinvented and origins are recreated and whatnot to keep it fresh. And sometimes it misses the mark hugely, bigly. To like it, the retelling. Like, I think there's I think this is a good segue to newer stuff, but to kind of get into comic books that I want to read. I believe I don't have it in front of me, but there is a series where there's a different Wolverine, and I think the gist of the story is Cyclops hops between universes or whatever, and he comes into contact with a different Emma Frost and a different Wolverine.
Mhm.
But gosh, I'll come ready next time, but I really want to dig into that. And I don't think I don't think they stay long in that universe or whatever, but it's just like a kind of a toss of the hat to that. But in any case, did you have any recommendations for books, media, comic books, that kind of thing?
Well, this past week, I finished Dune, and then I think I mentioned my goal of reading the first 100 issues of Amazing Spider-Man, which I did, the goal, woohoo, and that was enjoyable. I did read one other graphic novel, even though it's a PG, I don't, I'll go ahead and show it to you. Let's see.
Please.
It is called Red Room.
Ooh, okay.
It's written by Ed Piskor, and it's basically Red Room's the dark web, where killers kill people and will bid on them with Bitcoin. So it's sort of like, I guess it's sort of like Cam Girls, but it's guys getting killed, and then you got your audience. But each issue, this collects 4 issues of the series, and each issue kind of tells its own little story. So you can pick up, if you're reading the floppies, you could pick up a single issue and still get a complete story. But yeah, it's kind of gets into that world and different aspects of it. And it's very violent and very gory. And in the introduction to the book, he references the splatterpunk movement back in the 80s, which was the forefront of them was like Clive Barker and David J. Show, Joe R. Lansdale, John Skip. It's if you haven't read any splatterpunk, it's really capsulized by the movie Hellraiser. It's just in your face, horror and gore, and but with the story, with the interesting story, something that you can sink your teeth into.
That's awesome.
But yeah, it was very, very entertaining, and the art's incredible in it. It's kind of got that indie comic punk kind of art style to it.
Very cool.
Very kind of right to the edge of cartoony but realistic plus ultra gory. It's a nice mix of things.
That's awesome.
If you're not shy to gore, you might want to give it a try.
Yeah,
and
I definitely...
the graphic novel's out now, and he's starting and this completes his first run of 4 issues, and I think the next one comes out in a week or two with the new series. So.
Very cool. Yeah, I was trying to think. I think my recommendation is going to be to go back and to look at. It's already completed now, but there's the Foundation series on Apple TV Plus. That I have very high hopes for that, and I know that they were renewed. I know for a fact they were renewed for season 2. Lee Pace. If you want to talk about Timothy Chalamet or whatever, horrible his name, but I call back to Timothy Chalamet or Timothy C. One of these days we'll get these names right, but that's okay. I'm a newbie, and it is what it is. But he had a movie on Netflix called The King. And boy, he basically played Henry VIII, I believe, or no, not Henry V. Henry V. But you want to talk about a person who is an excellent actor for that kind of role. He fit into the Paul role perfectly, and that's no different than Lee Pace. And I'm trying to think of what he played before. I think he played in 'Halt and Catch Fire. I never watched that.
I saw *Halt and Catch Fire*. He's excellent in that.
Yeah,
and he's in *Lord of the Rings*. He's one of the.
That's true. That's true. Yeah,
and he's also in one of my favorite series, *Pushing Daisies*.
Okay, cool.
Very early on in his career, that was very good too.
Yeah, but he has the gravitas and the gravity to cover that. I mean, it just comes through, and you just want to see more and more of him. And I believe also coming up is The Expanse season 6. That is the final season for that. And we're on the doorstep of December, a couple of days away, if not a day. But that brings up mention of The Mandalorian. I believe is coming out season 3, and I also believe Boba Fett, the book of Boba Fett, I think is also coming out too. Those, I don't know if you've seen trailers or whatever, but I've seen like a trailer. And one of my favorite YouTubers who covers Star Wars content, Star Wars Theory, shout out, great channel. There's no acrimony on his channel. He just covers it as a fan, and that's what I hope that we aspire to be, something like what he puts out, which is, yes, he covers the negative, but he doesn't delve into the background, culture wars, any of that crap. He just kind of goes into like what's good off the top of my head. But that's what I hope that we can strive to be as we go forward here. And my apologies, folks. The technical suckiness is all mine to own and all mine to learn. And I promise you, Ed, next week we will have this thing nailed down. This week, also in the real world, we're just coming off of Thanksgiving week, and we are starting Hanukkah. This is the first night of Hanukkah, and after we get off here, I will be going and enjoying the kiddos and enjoying that for the next few days that I have the kiddos, and we'll just be really enjoying that time period. So I guess my recommendation is on the small screen for Expanse coming up. I don't even know the date, but I know it's going to come out in December. I think fairly soon.
Oh, and speaking of the evil overlord Disney, also Hawkeye came out this past week. Wasn't really looking forward to it. It didn't. It looked like it was going to be okay, but I wasn't blown away by the trailer. But I watched the first 2 episodes, and they were highly enjoyable. I did actually enjoy it. So give that a check out if you have the old Disney Plus.
Yeah. On that topic, real quick before we go, we're right about an hour, but we got a couple minutes left. What is your opinion as far as Jeremy Renner? Do you think it does justice to him? Because I know that there was like a lot of, well, we won't get into it, but do you think it does justice to his character and like what him as an actor? Because he's a great actor.
Yeah, the one of the things you could definitely see that they're kind of phasing in this younger girl, Kate Bishop, as the new Hawkeye, I guess, so to speak. And I figured I like the character, the Kate Bishop character, in that she's not this Rey type character from Star Wars that knows everything, can do anything. She early on sees Hawkeye in action as a child. They show that as a kind of at the beginning of the first episode. So she trains, she wants to be like Hawkeye, so she trains martial arts with the bow and everything. So she has all the training. And the show shows that she doesn't know everything. She does mess up, not perfect. And Jeremy's character, Hawkeye, comes in and helps her out, and it really kind of shows him in a definitely a fatherly character. Jeremy, one of the issues I had with the Black Widow movie is that ultimately there's a lot of humor in a Marvel show.
Sure.
And
it's true.
The Black Widow, Scarlett Johansson, she's a wonderful actor, but she's not a comedian. That it kind of fell flat to me because she didn't have the personality to carry a kind of a comedic Marvel movie, whereas in the Black Widow is kind of more of a serious movie, but at times you're supposed to connect to her through her humor, the softer moments, and that just didn't play. Whereas with Hawkeye, he has that charismatic kind of personality, and he's fun. He's just fun to look at and experience all the action and humor in that. He can carry it all the way through. He's what I'm trying to say is he's a better fit for what a Marvel show or movie needs from an actor to pull off, as far as the humor and the personality and the bigger than life personality,
the lighthearted nature of those movies, like where it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, like where Iron Man 1 that kicked everything off from there. It had that lighthearted kind of, I wouldn't say whimsical, but there was a tone of seriousness after a certain point with the Marvel movies, and that's fine. That's fine. I just and I won't hide it. I think by the time Avengers Endgame or came out, there's something like 21 to 25 movies in total that I had seen. That I at one point in time I could name them all off, but I think it was around Black Panther is where I kind of I enjoyed the hell out of Black Panther. Don't get me wrong. But there was just like this kind of like the wheels were. You can only watch so much of one thing before you get inundated. It's like, okay, I'm done. I need a break. And I think I'm no different than anybody else. But and not to say that Disney Marvel doesn't make great movies. They do. They make a lot of money. But
sometimes people are surprised, like, well, you're into comic books, why aren't you excited about the new Marvel movie? It's like, well, comics are a bit different. When you pick up a comic book, it's not going to be exactly the same prototype that you had the previous time. Like, there's a clear pattern or formula for Marvel movies, like you were saying, whereas you know what you're getting for the most part, whereas like comic books, every issue, every writer's a little bit different, so you're going to get a different flavor. Even if it's just superhero comics that you read, you're going to get a different flavor depending on which character, which writer, which artist is doing it. You're not going to get that same cookie cutter formula each time.
Yeah, and I find myself in the same position that I was with the movies, like sometime around that point, like where it's just like, I can only take so much, and I don't mean that in a bad way or whatever. It's just like they started to multiply it on the small screen, like with WandaVision and the other ones or whatever. And really, the one that kind of was refreshing, that I loved, that I came back into, that I just enjoyed, with no preamble, no expectation, was the What If animated. That was fantastic. The episodes on that, and I think we kind of went back and forth on Facebook of like what our favorite episode was, and we never really talked about it. And we should at some point. Maybe we'll do a What Ifs episode here one of these days. But
they're doing a second season, so that's probably be a good time to do it.
Absolutely. And the run up to that, absolutely. But there's just too much to keep track of, and I don't know about you, but I actually have to work. Of course, you have to work too. But there's only so much free time that I have, and if I unless I hear, I really don't keep up on the Netflixes of the world. And what I do is I'll listen to friends and family, and if something pops out that is really awesome to watch, then I'll watch it. But I don't. For example, one of the things that we can get into at some point would be Altered Carbon. That was a whole book series, and that's on Netflix. And the series that they did on Netflix was very good. And the books were also good. I'm not Neil Gaiman, but I can't remember who the author of the books were for that. But and that's another whole other genre of like more cyberpunk type, not noir, but very gritty, dystopian kind of ish future, not apocalyptic, but like very dystopian. Like the books are pretty good. But in any case, with that, we could go on and on forever. But with that being said, we'll pull it back to center, and I think it's no strange way to say that Dune is highly recommended. The movie that just came out, and I think I also, to kind of cover the news a little bit, Dune passed 100 million, so it is in the books domestically. I believe it made more money than King Kong versus whatever the King Kong movie was. That's a whole other thing to cover. But in that case, with that being said, I am Mike.
And I'm Thomas.
All right. And we will catch you guys on the flip side. See you next week.